Hi, welcome to the National Critics' Choice Online News, said Hyatt. I'm Robin Stienberg, and welcome to our show. We have today a very special guest, and that is Ambassador Jürgen Arsten-Moller, who is the expert on European affairs, and he's also a writer and a visiting senior research fellow at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies here in Singapore, and a adjunct professor for Singapore Management University and Copenhagen Business School. And today we're going to discuss about what's going to happen for the European community, and as well as the Chinese policies on economics, as well as the United States and Canada outlook. Ambassador, welcome to our show, and I know that it's been quite a while that you've been written your last book, and now you have moved forward, making tremendous contributions, and observations to what's going on in your research. Could you give us some insights on what's happening in the European community today?
Yes, primarily what we see is not a European crisis, it is a debt crisis. Europe, the United States, Japan have for many years lived beyond their means. The debt ratio, sovereign debt, in the US is approximately 100% to gross domestic product. In Europe it's approximately 90%, and in Japan it's approximately 240%, which means that all the major economic countries have to pay back what they have borrowed. And the real problem is that they borrowed when we had high economic growth. This was the time where they should have saved for rainy days, but they didn't. Now they have to pay back in a situation where economic growth is fairly low, and that of course makes it very acrimonious. And we can see that Europe and the United States have chosen different courses. Europe is saying, first we have to introduce new confidence in the economy, we have to stop the debt from growing, we have to bring the deficits on the public budgets under control. When that has happened, people start to believe in the future, and then they will hopefully and probably spend more. This is why you have the austerity in Europe, which is of course very agonizing, and we can see how countries actually struggle with it. But we can see the European determination. The European governments are all following this course, and so far the European populations are ready to live with it. The United States are saying, we already had a high debt ratio, but we continue to spend more. The US debt to GDP goes up every year. The deficit on the federal budget measured to GDP is about 7, 8, 9% every year, which actually means that the United States tries to spend itself out of the crisis. And that might have been a good policy if at the start they had not had the high debt. But to my mind, you cannot spend your way out of a crisis when you're already heavily mired in debt. So I think that the European approach is the right one. And 1, 2, 3 years down the road, I think that Europe will stand out as a fairly solid, robust economic entity, having tackled and solved the crisis, while the United States will be approaching a kind of default on its sovereign debt.
Now, speaking about the sovereign debt, why is it that there are more European countries right now have been invited to join the European Union? Is that a necessity? And if so, wouldn't that create more debt?
I don't think so. Actually, 2012 will be the last year where the debt GDP ratio will go up. From next year, it will start to fall. And we can see how the European Union is still very attractive. As you say, we have enlargement negotiations with Turkey, with Iceland, Serbia is also interested in joining. Croatia will become the 28th member of the European Union next year. So to my mind, it's very clear that the European Union actually works, and it works quite well. People do not see that in the current turmoil because the presentation in the mass media of Europe, the Euro, the European Union is dominated by bad news. And there are many reasons for that, which I'll not elaborate on because it's useless. But you very rarely see the good news. One of the good news is that if you had not had the euro, you would in Europe have seen competitive devaluations. Look back at what we saw in the 70s and the 80s, where there were a lot of currency wars. Every time you had an international financial crisis, the Deutschmark went up and the rest of the European currencies went down. You would have had a repetition of that. Look at what has happened to the Swiss franc. It has been looked upon as a safe haven, which means that the competitiveness of Swiss industry has been heavily eroded. So the euro has served as a very important bulwark against these competitive devaluations, and to my mind, it has actually saved the world from a financial disaster. People looking upon Spain, Italy, Greece, Ireland say, you're wrong. What you say is a pipe dream. But to my mind, I'm actually right, in the sense that the problem for the weaker countries in the European Union is that for many years they have run, let us call it, non-competitive, petrified economies with a lot of regulations, rules, which have made it impossible for them to compete on an equal footing in the global economy. Their big chance now is that the membership of the euro forces them to do the restructure, the modernization, the reform of their domestic economies, which is long overdue. If they don't do that, they will be confined to stagnation for the next decade or two. So hopefully they will get on with it, and we can see this is actually happening in Greece, in Italy and Spain. Reform process is well underway. That would never have happened without the euro.
Now you spoke about reform, and you spoke about the debt crisis that is now almost come to its resolve. But why is it that that Spain and other European countries who are still having a debt issue, and additional loans has been extended to them? Would that be the last? Because most critics, and policymakers felt that there is one loan too many. And do you think that the European Union will stop making any further loans and allow the collapse of the system?
I don't think that the system will collapse, and I don't think that borrowing will go up. But of course you need, let's say, refinancing the debt. The debt does not go away in a fortnight. When you turn economies around, as we try to do in Greece, Portugal, Ireland, Spain, Italy, you need time. You cannot with a snap of a finger redo or retool an economy which has been left in a fairly bad state for many years. You may need 2 years, you may need 4 years, you may need 3 years. It is difficult to say, but you need time. But we can see it works. We can actually see in Italy, Spain, we can see in Ireland, we can see in Portugal. It's a bit more difficult in Greece. See how these economies, they're gradually, slowly turning around. So if the markets would give us a little bit more time, I would have no doubt whatsoever that it would be a success. But one of the problems is that the market sees a chance to get a profit by breaking up the euro or by forcing some of the countries into default. If you are an investment banker or whatever role you have in the global financial framework, you can position yourself so that you will make a profit for your bank or investment corporation if a country goes into default. So you try to force that issue. So what we see now is a dichotomy in the sense that the weaker European countries, they need time to do their restructuring, while the market are not very much disposed to give these countries that time because they look for a profit for themselves.
Now you spoke about the profit and you spoke about defaults. And who are the main actors who are responsible in trying to capitalize such defaults? Do you think that Chinese as well as the Koreans have been observing the European Union and taking advantage of such investments, or could it be the United States?
No, I don't think that the Chinese or Koreans have tried to take advantage of the situation. I'm convinced that the Chinese see a strong interest for themselves in a strong European Union and the euro as an international currency for the very obvious reason that if the euro was not there, there would actually be only one international currency, and that would be the US dollar. And the Chinese would not feel comfortable with that. So the Chinese is, to my mind, maneuvering to maintain the euro. But the Chinese are not doing that to help or support euro. They're doing it because it's their own interest. And of course they are doing it in the way so that they safeguard their position. So that if it does go wrong, despite all efforts, they will not lose too much money. But the Chinese is silently behind the scenes supporting the euro because they want an alternative to the dollar. Those who are not doing that is a number of financial institutions which try to push countries into default. Just to mention an example, there's something which goes under the label of vulture funds. And they are actually engaged in pushing Greece into default because they have bought Greece bonds at a price which will give them a very handsome profit if Greece actually defaults. So they're trying to push the issue all the time. There was a case a couple of months ago where one of these vulture funds forced Greece to pay back $450 million of a loan. And I think that's a very bad thing. And the international world should not allow this to happen.
Now, you spoke about alternatives, and what's happening with the investments from the Middle East?
Sorry, what's that?
The investments from the Middle East I came to believe and understand that Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern banks have a stake in this crisis as well. And what sort of stake do you identify? Do they have a strong hold on the stock exchange in Europe? And also, could you give us some insight about what's happening with the possible merger with the Singapore Stock Exchange and the London Stock Exchange?
Well, the first one about where's the money going? The money is going into commodities, raw materials, gold, silver, oil. We used to say that the global monetary system is based upon the US dollar, but that is not any longer true. It's based upon commodities. As an economist, you would say that the commodity price index should actually fall quite visibly when economic growth is low. And that is not the case. Commodity prices are falling, yes, but not very much. That is because the Federal Reserve System in the US and the European Central Bank System are pumping money into the system, into the economy. When they do that, people start to ask, what should we use the money for? We have a lot of liquidity, we have a lot of money, and the demand is weak. So the only thing they can do is actually they can go and buy property, they can go and buy commodities, gold, silver, oil, and they do. Many American banks, they have actually bought large warehouses where they stock the commodities which their customers have bought. So the money goes into, let's call it, assets, tangible assets, because people have lost confidence, completely lost confidence in the political system and in the central bank system. Go around and ask many people, do we have confidence in Obama's ability to control the economy? The answer would be no. Do we have confidence in Bernanke's ability to control the monetary system? The answer is no. People do not trust them any longer. They may be wrong in having lost their confidence, but that is what has happened. If you do not believe in the political system and the central bank anymore, where do you put your money? You put your money in a place where it is beyond the reach of the political system and the central bank. And there's only one place you can do that, and this is in the asset market. That is why you can see that you separate the goods and services market and the asset market. The good and service market, let's call it the real economy, is in a very bad state. The assets market is doing fine. Property prices is going up. Gold is going up. I mean, you have a gold price $1,600 per ounce, which is, I mean, I don't know which words I should use, but you know, it's incomprehensible in the present state of affairs. With regard to the possible merger about the Singapore Stock Exchange and the London Stock Exchange, I do not really have any insight. But I think that this is one of the many cases where you can see that there is a strong concentration in the financial system.
Yeah, so do you believe that that Britain is bankrupt in some ways, which is why the London Stock Exchange needs to merge with the Singapore Stock Exchange?
I don't know whether I would say that Britain is bankrupt. Britain is clearly not bankrupt as things stand now, but the debt situation in Britain is very, very bad if you look at it. And I don't really know whether that is one of the reasons that the London Stock Exchange is looking for a merger.
But do you think that Britain will ever join the European Union?
Yeah, Britain is a member of the European Union.
Oh, is it? Right
yes,
now?
But probably you think about whether they will join the euro and the single currency. And my answer to that question is no, I don't think they will ever do that.
Why is it so?
And actually, I think that they may leave the European Union. Look, the main advantages for being member of the single currency is that you have an economy which is more or less congruous with the other member states' economies, so that you have convergence in the economic development. If you look at the British, French, German economy, you would say that the German and French economy, they are more or less congruous. You have a fairly large degree of manufacturing, you have a good service economy, and you have also an okay agricultural sector. But the British economy is dominated by oil and by the financial sector. You can say that the oil and the financial sector accounts for approximately up to 20% of GDP in Britain, which actually means that the British economy is completely different from the German and the French economy. When that is the case, it does not make any sense for them to join. So I think that they actually took the right decision by not joining the euro.
Interesting. And in regards to for not joining the euro, what do you see the policies behind the state of Israel? Because we observe, the critics observe that there's so much investment has been invested heavily in Israel, especially from Germany and France in terms of technology and and research as well. Now, how does that affect the markets, especially does Israel plays a very important role, in terms of the development and research with the European counterparts, because Israel regards themselves as the European state in the Middle East.
Yeah, Israel has developed into a technological powerhouse. There are a lot of very strong technology-related Israeli enterprises, and the relationship between the European Union and Israel is very good, with a number of agreements which control the economic activities. But as we all know, the political situation is very difficult in that part of the world. And we also know that even if Israel looks upon Europe as a partner, ultimately Israel will look to the United States, because the United States is the only power that can guarantee Israel's security. And with the present turmoil and turbulence in the Middle East, that is a very acute problem for the Israeli political leadership.
And despite of the investments that's been made in Europe and Israel, vice versa, wouldn't that change? Because the European Union has a fair bit of investments with Israel and as well as the Middle East. What kind of impact do you see in the coming few years, especially the Chinese that is coming in to make a huge difference, especially in terms of economic investment? Would that change the way European banking system operates? Will the Chinese will have what should I say? Will play a very phenomenal acting role in their policies.
Well, I think that when you talk about the European banking system, you should again divide. We have a British banking system and a continental European banking system. And the British banking system is more or less in the same boat as the US banking system, which means that they have overplayed their hands. We can see with one scandal after another, with the LIBOR interest rates, and this morning there was a new scandal on the newspaper with Standard Chartered Bank, which has apparently whitewashed money despite all the regulations. So the British and the American banking system have, let's say, abused their expertise, their knowledge. If you go back, let's say 5-6 years, if you go back to 2005 and you looked at the banking system, you would say that the Americans and the British banks, they were master of the playing fields. This was where you have the expertise, the people who knew, the people who could do it. Right now it turns out that they have actually not done what they should have done. And a lot of things that they have done is actually morally flawed and was not economically sound. The continental European banking system, the German, the French, the Italian, the Spanish system is more, let's call it slow-moving, more old-fashioned, and which is why it looked outdated 10 years ago. But because they have not been engaged so heavily in all these sophisticated transactions, it means that they have not got their fingers burnt. So many of the European continental banks now emerge as, let's say, fairly good bets for the future. one of the best banks in the coming years will probably be a French bank called BNP Paribas. And if you look at the Chinese, when the financial crisis struck in 2007, 2008, the Chinese reacted by saying, we use this opportunity to buy into the global financial system. And they bought a share of ownership in many of the British American financial institutions, but not so much in the continental European institutions. Yes, they did so with the Swiss banks, but not with the German, French, Italian, Spanish banks. I think the Chinese will be interested in linking up with these banks in the future when they see the change in, let's say, power among the banks arising.
And could you tell us what are the key events which the Chinese will be taking steps in the European Union, and could you also give us probably three keys events which the European Union will be taking certain positions for Southeast Asia, and what does it mean for the next 5 years right now?
Well, if you look at the next 5 years, you can be fairly certain that China will still be the most important creditor nation in the world. This is where the money will be. This is where you will have the global savings. And China, like all other countries in the same position, will use this money to buy shares of foreign companies and also to buy foreign companies as a whole. So they will simply invest in companies. They will do that for several reasons. They will do it because they want ownership, they want expertise, they want knowledge, and they want market shares. If they go into high technology, it's probably because they need access to the technology. They buy new technology. When they, for example, buy a car manufacturer in Europe, which they have done recently, they bought the Swedish car manufacturing Volvo, it's probably because they want the expertise of management. How do you manage a global car manufacturing? They need that for their development of their own car industry. And the third reason is that they buy into a lot of commodity resources to make sure that they still have access to commodities and raw materials for the Chinese economy. So they are actually acting in exactly the same way as Britain 150 years ago and the United States 75 years ago. That there's nothing new in that. And it's natural that those who have the money invest, and ultimately those who have the money will also be those who define the rules of the games. So for the European Union, the challenge is to adjust to this new phenomenon and realize that gradually there's a shift in the global economy so that the course will be set by China and not any longer by Europe or the United States. And of course for the Europeans it's difficult because I'm myself a European and we have got used to invest overseas. We buy foreign companies, we invest in China, and we control economic activities abroad. And now we are suddenly confronted with the issue that the Chinese are coming and buying our companies and trying to control economic activities in our markets. It will take time before we digest this new state of affairs. But actually, as I say, there's nothing new in that. The new thing is that it's the Chinese who is doing it instead of somebody else.
And is it going to be sustainable? Do you think that the Chinese have the muscle? Are they really printing money, or do they actually have real assets to make such demands?
In a 5-year horizon, yes. In a longer horizon, probably yes. If the Chinese can manage the transition to a more technology-oriented economy. But that is a difficult operation to undertake, and there's no guarantee that the Chinese will actually succeed in doing it.
As a European yourself, Ambassador, do you feel that that the Europeans feel insulted that the Chinese are now buying up Europe?
I think some Europeans are. I'm not insulted, and I'm not surprised. I think it's a natural state of affairs, and I don't mind. I mean, for a European, the Americans have been doing it for 75 years. We've seen all the American multinationals in Europe. Now the Chinese are doing it. What's wrong with that?
So you think, like Kishore Mahbubani once said, so Asians can think. Is that true?
Oh, yes. Certainly. Of course they can. Yeah.
No problem. Once again, Ambassador, thank you for joining us here at the National Critics' Choice St. Hyatt, and
Yeah, pleasure.
and thank you for joining us here at St. Hyatt and Robin Steinberg. Have a good week ahead.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah, we covered the whole field, I think.
Sure.